June 15, 1940, near the forests of Compiegne, France. General Wilhelm Hartmann stood beside his staff car, watching American supply trucks lumber past on muddy roads, their engines wheezing under loads of ammunition and rations. The vehicles looked pathetic, small, boxy things with canvas tops that flapped in the wind, struggling through terrain that would challenge even the finest Mercedes. Hartmann lit a cigarette and laughed, turning to his aide, Major Klaus Reinhardt. "Look at what the Americans bring to war," he said, smoke curling from his lips. "Tin cans on wheels. They call it a jeep. We'll crush them with real machinery, with Panthers and Tigers that shake the earth." Reinhardt nodded, sharing his commander's contempt. For 3 years, German intelligence had dismissed reports about American motor vehicle production. Numbers meant nothing compared to quality, and these lightweight quarter-ton trucks appeared to be exactly what propaganda had promised, proof of American industrial mediocrity. The Willys MB Jeep, weighing barely 2,400 pounds and powered by a modest 60-horsepower engine, seemed laughably inadequate for modern warfare. Within months, that assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. More importantly, it would reveal how a simple, unpretentious vehicle could become the backbone of the most successful military logistics operation in history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The psychological impact of that first encounter with massed jeep columns rippled through German command posts across occupied Europe. Officers who witnessed American mobility understood immediately that warfare had fundamentally changed. Captain Sarah Mitchell of the 2nd Armored Division, stationed near the Belgian border, heard the intelligence briefings with growing confidence. The jeep could traverse terrain that stopped heavier vehicles cold, ford streams 30 inches deep, climb grades that defeated conventional trucks, and maintain speeds of 60 miles per hour on decent roads. The mathematics were simple and undeniable. If the Americans deployed these vehicles in significant numbers with adequate fuel and trained drivers, they could move troops and supplies faster than any army in history. German half-tracks and trucks, dependent on paved roads and vulnerable to mechanical failure, would be outmaneuvered at every turn. For the first time since their lightning victories across Poland and France, German commanders faced the possibility of losing the initiative they had held since 1939. But the Jeep's revolutionary design carried advantages that arose from the fundamental nature of American industrial philosophy in 1941. The Willys MB represented a triumph of practical engineering over aesthetic pretension. Ford Motor Company and Willys Overland had collaborated on specifications that prioritized function, durability, and mass production capability. Each vehicle developed approximately 60 horsepower from its 134 cubic inch inline 4-cylinder engine, burning through standard gasoline at a rate that allowed 300-mile operational ranges. The suspension system, featuring semi-elliptical leaf springs front and rear, absorbed punishment that would destroy lighter vehicles. Under combat conditions, Jeeps operated reliably in temperatures from 40 below zero to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, requiring minimal maintenance that ordinary soldiers could perform with basic tools. This meant that after thousands of miles of brutal service, Jeeps continued functioning while German vehicles sat broken beside roads, waiting for parts that would never arrive. The vehicle's four-wheel drive system presented immediate tactical advantages. Unlike two-wheel drive trucks that spun helplessly in mud or sand, the Jeep distributed power to all four wheels through a transfer case that drivers could engage with a simple floor-mounted lever. Drivers learned to shift into four-wheel drive before entering difficult terrain, then shift back to two-wheel drive on solid roads to conserve fuel and reduce mechanical wear. In combat, where split-second decisions often meant survival, This reliable all-terrain capability transformed logistics from a limiting factor into a competitive advantage. The Jeep's cargo and personnel capacity magnified these mechanical strengths into tactical revolution. With a payload rating of 800 pounds, substantially higher than its weight suggested, the vehicle could carry 4 soldiers with full combat equipment, or mount a .50 caliber machine gun and ammunition, or transport wounded personnel, or haul radio equipment, or tow a 37mm anti-tank gun. During critical reconnaissance missions, Jeeps covered ground faster than any other vehicle in any army, moving cross-country at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour where terrain permitted. For those precious hours when speed determined victory or defeat, the Jeep provided mobility that enemies could not match, could not predict, and could barely comprehend. Any German unit that encountered American Jeep columns during rapid advances faced a nearly impossible defensive problem, watching opponents who could arrive from unexpected directions strike hard and disappear before reinforcements could respond. Supply operations magnified these tactical advantages into strategic dominance. As American forces pushed inland from Normandy beaches after D-Day, Jeeps became the circulatory system of advancing armies. They shuttled ammunition forward to frontline units burning through hundreds of rounds per minute. They evacuated wounded soldiers from aid stations to field hospitals, saving thousands of lives through rapid medical evacuation that would have been impossible with slower vehicles. They carried radio equipment that kept dispersed units in communication across fluid battlefields. They transported officers between command posts, enabling coordination that turned individual unit actions into synchronized operations. They hauled water, food, medical supplies, replacement weapons, mail from home, and every other commodity that modern armies consumed in staggering quantities. Intelligence officers at Allied headquarters in England studied German logistics methodically through late summer 1944. Photo reconnaissance missions revealed the contrast starkly. German supply columns moved slowly on predictable roads, vulnerable to air attack and partisan ambush. American Jeep convoys dispersed across multiple routes, using secondary roads and cross-country mobility to avoid interdiction. Analysis of after-action reports revealed that American units maintained supply flow even during rapid advances that outran their railroad support. German units, dependent on horse-drawn wagons and fuel-starved trucks, suffered critical shortages whenever operations deviated from carefully planned schedules. This logistical flexibility created an opportunity. If American forces could maintain momentum through superior mobility, they could prevent German armies from establishing defensive lines and recovering from defeats. The Wehrmacht recognized this vulnerability immediately after the Normandy breakout. Commanders watched helplessly as American armored divisions, supported by endless streams of Jeeps, advanced 50, 60, sometimes 80 miles in single days, speeds that German planning staffs had considered impossible for sustained operations. They installed stronger defenses along predicted American routes, positioning anti-tank guns and infantry to create killing zones that any advancing force would have to penetrate. They assigned their best remaining units, including SS Panzer divisions and paratroop battalions, to counterattack American spearheads. They randomized defensive positions when possible to prevent American reconnaissance from mapping their dispositions. Some commanders deployed captured American vehicles as decoys to lure attackers into ambushes. The hedgerow country of Normandy was modified with additional obstacles, turning fields into fortresses and roads into death traps. Despite these defensive measures, the fundamental tactical problem remained unsolvable. American forces had to advance, and when they did, Jeeps ensured they could sustain operations far beyond what German commanders believed possible.
The third gun's crew abandoned their weapon and fled into the woods. Chen directed Martinez to withdraw immediately, knowing that German infantry would be searching for the observation post that had called in such devastating fire. The Jeep accelerated smoothly, its four-wheel drive gripping soft ground as Martinez steered between trees and across fields. They covered the 5 miles back to American lines in less than 20 minutes, arriving safely despite German small arms fire that cracked through the air behind them. Chen had accomplished her mission without losing a single soldier, demonstrating that Jeep mobility enabled reconnaissance operations that would have been suicidal with any other vehicle. The engagement proved what training had suggested, that speed and agility could substitute for armor and firepower when missions required stealth rather than direct combat. Chen's after-action report emphasized that the Jeep's cross-country performance exceeded specifications, that its reliability under stress was absolute, and that its tactical value for reconnaissance missions justified every dollar spent on its development. 4th Infantry Division headquarters distributed her report throughout the command, and within weeks, similar reconnaissance tactics became standard across multiple units. Other officers read Chen's report and began experimenting with aggressive Jeep employment for missions beyond simple transportation. The tactical applications expanded rapidly as commanders discovered new ways to exploit the vehicle's capabilities. Jeeps mounted with .50 caliber machine guns became mobile fire support platforms, racing along enemy flanks and pouring heavy fire into exposed positions before withdrawing. Jeeps equipped with stretchers and medical supplies became ambulances that could reach wounded soldiers in forward areas and evacuate them faster than any other means. Jeeps carrying radio equipment became mobile command posts, allowing senior officers to position themselves where they could observe battle firsthand while maintaining communication with higher headquarters. Jeeps towing anti-tank guns became rapid response forces, moving to threatened sectors and engaging enemy armor from unexpected angles. The vehicle's versatility meant that every Jeep represented multiple potential capabilities, and commanders learned to employ them creatively based on immediate tactical situations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Through August and September 1944, American forces refined their Jeep-based logistics based on hard-won experience and carefully analyzed operational data. The vehicle proved ideal for sustaining rapid advances because of its exceptional reliability and fuel efficiency. A Jeep with full fuel tanks could travel more than 300 miles before refueling, giving supply units the ability to make round trips from supply depots to frontline units without requiring intermediate fuel points. When convoys operated continuously, rotating drivers and maintaining movement 24 hours daily, Jeeps could transport staggering quantities of supplies across distances that would have paralyzed armies dependent on railroads or horse-drawn transport. Timing was critical. Maintaining supply flow during rapid advances required positioning supply dumps ahead of actual needs, anticipating where frontline units would be rather than where they currently were.
Sustaining momentum required accepting the risk that supplies might be overrun if advances stalled or German counterattacks succeeded. Fighter pilots provided another critical element, with P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs flying combat air patrol over supply routes, protecting vulnerable convoys from German air attack. Commanders developed intimate knowledge of Jeep operational patterns through persistent experience and systematic analysis. They learned that Jeeps typically required preventative maintenance every 1,000 miles, far less frequently than German vehicles that needed constant attention. They noted that Jeeps rarely broke down catastrophically, usually developing minor problems that drivers could diagnose and repair with onboard toolkits. They understood that American mechanics, trained on standardized procedures and supplied with abundant spare parts, could repair damaged Jeeps faster than German mechanics could repair their more complex vehicles. This reliability factor gave American logistics a crucial psychological advantage. Drivers knew their vehicles would function, allowing them to focus on their missions rather than worrying about mechanical failure. The German military's response grew increasingly desperate in late 1944, but fundamental problems remained unsolvable. Fuel shortages meant that even functional German trucks sat idle for lack of gasoline. Parts shortages meant that repairable vehicles awaited components that factories could no longer produce due to strategic bombing. Driver shortages meant that available vehicles lacked trained operators, as experienced personnel were reassigned to infantry units to replace combat losses. Some German units captured American Jeeps and pressed them into service, ironically finding them superior to their own vehicles. Despite these efforts, the mathematical reality could not be changed. American industry produced Jeeps faster than combat could destroy them, while German vehicle production declined under relentless bombing. American logistics could sustain operations across vast distances, while German supply lines contracted as Allied armies advanced. September 12, 1944, produced one of the most dramatic demonstrations of Jeep capabilities when elements of the 5th Armored Division, supported by hundreds of Jeeps carrying fuel and ammunition, advanced more than 70 miles in a single day during the race across France. The advance was perfectly supported, with supply Jeeps arriving at predetermined locations just as combat units needed refueling and rearming. In the chaos of rapid movement, American logistics continued functioning flawlessly, while German units found themselves cut off and surrounded, their slow-moving supply systems unable to keep pace with fluid battlefield conditions. The operation demonstrated that sustained mobility could achieve decisive results when properly supported, though it required meticulous planning and flawless execution. The 5th Armored Division's advance showed that concentrated Jeep employment for logistics could enable operational tempos that enemies simply could not match. The psychological impact of never-ending American mobility on German commanders was profound and cumulative. German officers were experienced professionals, veterans of campaigns across Europe and Russia who understood logistics and mobility.
They had initially dismissed American vehicles as inadequate for serious warfare, products of a nation that valued quantity over quality. Repeated encounters with Jeep-supported American operations, however, created a growing realization that they had fundamentally misunderstood American military capabilities. Officers knew that every American advance was supported by logistics that German forces could not replicate. The knowledge that American units never seemed to run short of fuel, ammunition, or supplies, that there was no pause or consolidation phase that allowed defenders to recover, created psychological pressure that affected planning and morale. The October 21, 1944 crossing of the Moselle River illustrated both the Jeep's potential and its central role in enabling operations that changed the war's trajectory. A total of 85,000 American soldiers, supported by thousands of vehicles, including more than 3,000 Jeeps, forced crossings along a 50-mile front. German commanders had fortified the river line, believing that the water obstacle would halt American advances and allow time to reorganize defenses. American engineers, arriving in Jeeps carrying bridging equipment and tools, constructed pontoon bridges under fire, while infantry established bridgeheads on the eastern bank. Supply Jeeps began crossing within hours, carrying ammunition and fuel to troops still fighting to expand their footholds. The operation succeeded because logistics kept pace with combat, a feat that German planning staffs considered nearly impossible given the distances involved and the speed of American movements. Even accepting that American industrial capacity exceeded German production, the ability to translate that capacity into frontline combat power through effective logistics impressed and demoralized German defenders. General Hartmann, the same officer who had mocked American vehicles in 1940, found himself retreating across Germany in early 1945. His unit depended on horse-drawn wagons because fuel for trucks no longer existed. He watched American Jeeps race past his positions, carrying troops and supplies forward, while his own soldiers walked because transport had broken down or run out of fuel. In a letter to his wife discovered after the war, Hartmann wrote with bitter honesty about his earlier arrogance. "I called them tin cans," he wrote, "but those tin cans carried an army across Europe while our magnificent vehicles sit broken beside roads. We built for show, they built for war, and now we pay the price for our pride." His admission captured the broader German military experience in the war's final year. Watching opponents who had been dismissed as militarily inferior demonstrate superior operational effectiveness through better logistics and more practical equipment.
The statistical reality of Jeep operations revealed the gap between theoretical specifications and practical effectiveness. American records indicate approximately 640,000 Jeeps were manufactured during the war. Of those manufactured, the vast majority saw active service in every theater of operations, from North Africa to the Pacific, from Italy to Northwest Europe. At no point did American forces face vehicle shortages that limited operations, and typical availability rates exceeded 90%, meaning that 9 of every 10 Jeeps assigned to units were operationally ready at any given time. This force supported American military strength exceeding 8 million personnel at peak deployment, plus provided vehicles to allied nations through Lend-Lease programs. The mathematics were overwhelming. Jeep production exceeded losses by enormous margins, ensuring that American logistics capability grew stronger throughout the war, while German logistics collapsed. American commanders who successfully employed Jeeps in innovative ways became recognized experts within the military, their operational reports studied carefully by logistics officers and planners. Beyond Sarah Chen, hundreds of other officers demonstrated that creative thinking and aggressive execution could leverage the Jeep's capabilities to achieve results far beyond simple transportation. These officers shared common characteristics: exceptional organizational skills, detailed planning abilities, aggressive temperaments, and willingness to accept risks that more cautious logistics officers avoided. Pushing supply convoys through potentially hostile territory required courage and confidence in both vehicles and personnel. Yet these officers repeatedly executed such missions because they understood that maintaining frontline supply flow was as important as combat operations themselves. The human dedication behind these operations affected outcomes profoundly. American drivers who navigated Jeeps through combat zones demonstrated remarkable bravery, often driving under fire to deliver critical supplies. Mechanics who kept vehicles running under field conditions performed small miracles of improvisation and determination. Officers who planned and coordinated logistics movements orchestrated operations of stunning complexity. Each successful supply delivery represented the combined efforts of dozens of personnel, all working toward the common goal of keeping combat units supplied and mobile. The infrastructure supporting Jeep operations expanded progressively through 1944 and 1945. As Allied armies advanced into Germany, supply lines stretched longer but never broke because American logistics adapted continuously. New supply depots were established, staffed, and stocked. Fuel pipelines were constructed across France and Belgium, ensuring gasoline availability near front lines. Maintenance facilities moved forward with advancing armies, providing repair capabilities close to operating units. Spare parts flowed through supply chains with impressive reliability, ensuring that repairable vehicles returned to service quickly. The entire system functioned with efficiency that German observers found incomprehensible, a product of American industrial capacity and organizational competence working in harmony toward victory. The final months of European operations in late 1944 and early 1945 witnessed American logistics achieving levels of efficiency that military historians still study as examples of excellence. Jeeps formed the foundation of this system, providing the tactical mobility that translated strategic plans into operational reality. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when German forces launched their final major offensive through the Ardennes forest, American logistics responded with speed that shocked attackers who had counted on disrupting Allied supply lines. Within hours of the German breakthrough, Jeep convoys were rerouting supplies to threatened sectors, evacuating wounded from surrounded positions, and carrying ammunition to units fighting desperately to hold key road junctions. The flexibility that Jeeps provided allowed American forces to respond faster than German planners had believed possible, rushing reinforcements to critical points while maintaining supply flow to units across a chaotic battlefield. German commanders had designed their offensive assuming that American logistics would collapse under pressure, creating opportunities for exploitation.
Instead, they discovered that American supply systems adapted and functioned effectively even during crisis, a testament to both vehicle reliability and personnel competence. Major Rachel Thompson of the 101st Airborne Division experienced this logistics miracle firsthand while her unit defended Bastogne during the German siege. Thompson, serving as operations officer, coordinated supply distribution for surrounded paratroopers who were running critically short of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. On December 23rd, when weather cleared enough for airdrops, jeeps raced across Bastogne collecting supplies from drop zones and distributing them to rifle companies holding the defensive perimeter. Thompson personally drove a jeep loaded with ammunition through artillery fire, delivering critical supplies to positions that were nearly overrun. Her vehicle took shrapnel damage that punctured the radiator and shredded 2 tires, but the jeep continued running long enough for Thompson to complete her mission and return to friendly lines. Maintenance crews repaired the damage in less than 6 hours, and the same jeep was back in service that evening, carrying more supplies forward. Thompson's experience was repeated thousands of times across the Bulge battlefield, with jeeps proving that even under worst-case conditions, American logistics could sustain combat operations. The engineering simplicity that made jeeps reliable also made them repairable under field conditions that would defeat more complex vehicles. Every jeep carried a basic toolkit, including wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers, and tire repair equipment. Drivers received training in basic maintenance and emergency repairs, enabling them to fix common problems without requiring specialized mechanics. The vehicle's design used standardized parts wherever possible, meaning that components from one jeep could be swapped to another with minimal modification. When battle damage or mechanical failure disabled a jeep beyond field repair, recovery teams could cannibalize useful parts to keep other vehicles running. This maintenance philosophy reflected broader American military thinking that prioritized keeping maximum numbers of vehicles operational rather than maintaining each vehicle in perfect condition. German vehicles engineered to tighter tolerances with more specialized components required factory-level repairs for problems that American soldiers fixed beside roads with hand tools. The contrast in maintenance philosophy produced dramatic differences in operational availability rates that compounded over months of continuous operations. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the 3rd Army's Logistics Command became an expert in jeep employment through managing supply operations during the race across France. Rodriguez, a 31-year-old officer from Texas with pre-war experience in transportation management, understood that moving supplies efficiently required treating logistics as a science rather than simply driving trucks forward. She developed route schedules that coordinated jeep convoys to avoid congestion while ensuring continuous supply flow. She positioned maintenance teams at intervals along supply routes, enabling quick repairs that kept convoys moving. She established communication networks that allowed drivers to report problems immediately and receive assistance without losing hours to confusion. Her systems reduced average delivery times by 30% while increasing total tonnage delivered by similar margins. Rodriguez's innovations were studied and adopted across multiple armies, improving logistics effectiveness throughout Allied forces in Europe. The technological lessons from jeep operations directly influenced post-war military vehicle development worldwide. American designers retained the basic quarter-ton utility vehicle concept while incorporating improvements based on combat experience. The M38 Jeep that entered service in the early 1950s featured stronger frames to handle increased loads, waterproofed electrical systems for amphibious operations, and improved cold weather starting capability for operations in extreme climates. Payload capacity increased to 1,200 pounds without sacrificing the agility and reliability that made the original Jeep successful. Better shock absorbers improved ride quality on rough terrain, reducing crew fatigue during long missions. Enhanced lighting systems provided better visibility for night operations. Each improvement addressed specific weaknesses identified during World War II while preserving the fundamental characteristics that made Jeeps effective.
Soviet designers studied captured American Jeeps extensively, examining their construction and testing their capabilities to understand American military thinking. The GAZ-67 and later GAZ-69 Soviet utility vehicles incorporated design elements clearly influenced by Jeep analysis, including four-wheel drive systems, simple maintenance procedures, and emphasis on reliability over performance. British forces received thousands of Jeeps through Lend-Lease and found them superior to comparable British vehicles in most operational roles. After the war, British designers developed the Land Rover, partly in response to recognition that military and civilian users needed vehicles with Jeep-like capabilities. The global proliferation of light utility vehicle designs that resulted from Jeep influence reshaped military logistics and civilian transportation for decades, proving that good design transcends national boundaries and technological competition. The cultural impact of the Jeep extended far beyond military applications, influencing how societies thought about transportation and capability. Soldiers who had driven Jeeps during the war returned home with appreciation for vehicles that combined utility, reliability, and versatility. Civilian Jeep production began almost immediately after the war ended, with Willys marketing the CJ series to farmers, ranchers, construction companies, and recreational users. The vehicles found ready markets among people who valued function over appearance and needed transportation that could handle rough conditions. Jeeps became symbols of American practicality and can-do attitude, representing the idea that challenges could be overcome through smart design and determined effort. The vehicle appeared in countless films, television shows, and photographs from the post-war era, always associated with adventure, capability, and overcoming obstacles.
This cultural resonance meant that Jeep's influence reached far beyond the military personnel who would use them in combat, shaping broader public understanding of what vehicles could accomplish. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, whose reconnaissance mission in France had demonstrated Jeep capability so dramatically, continued serving in the military after the war ended. She rose to colonel, commanded logistics units during the Korean War, and spent years teaching military logistics at staff colleges. In interviews during her retirement, Chen always emphasized that the Jeep's success resulted from matching design to mission requirements rather than pursuing performance for its own sake. "We didn't need the fastest vehicle or the most powerful," she explained. "We needed something reliable that soldiers could maintain, that could go anywhere we needed it to go, and that industry could build in the quantities we required." The Jeep was exactly that. It wasn't glamorous, but it won the war as surely as any tank or aircraft. Her perspective captured the essential truth that World War II taught about military effectiveness, that practical solutions often outperform sophisticated alternatives when operations demand sustained performance under difficult conditions. The logistical achievement that Jeeps enabled became a central theme in post-war military education and planning. Staff officers studied the European campaign's supply operations as examples of how to sustain large forces across vast distances. The key lessons emphasized flexibility, redundancy, forward positioning of supplies, and maintaining momentum through continuous operations. Jeeps had enabled all these principles by providing the tactical mobility that connected strategic supply systems to frontline consumption. Without that connection, supplies accumulated at depots while frontline units ran short, a problem that had plagued armies throughout history. With Jeeps providing reliable transportation from depots to combat units, the entire logistics chain functioned smoothly. Modern military forces still apply these lessons, using contemporary equivalents of Jeeps, light tactical vehicles with similar capabilities adapted for current technologies to maintain the supply flow that sustains operations. The fundamental principle remains unchanged. Armies advance on their logistics, and logistics require reliable transportation. The comparative analysis between German and American logistics approaches revealed philosophical differences that extended beyond vehicle design to encompass entire military cultures. German military tradition emphasized excellence, precision, and technological superiority. Vehicles were engineered to high standards with powerful engines and sophisticated components. This approach produced impressive machines that performed well under ideal conditions but struggled with the messy realities of sustained combat operations. American military tradition emphasized pragmatism, mass production, and good-enough solutions that could be implemented quickly and maintained easily. Vehicles were designed to acceptable standards with reliable components and simple systems. This approach produced unimpressive machines that performed adequately under all conditions and continued functioning when sophisticated alternatives failed. The war tested both philosophies under ultimate pressure and rendered clear verdict. Pragmatism defeated perfectionism because wars are won by forces that can sustain operations rather than by forces that achieve temporary excellence.
General Wilhelm Hartmann survived the war and spent years in Allied custody before returning to Germany in the early 1950s. He wrote extensively about his military experiences, including honest assessments of German failures and American successes. In one particularly insightful passage, Hartmann analyzed why German commanders had so badly misjudged American military capabilities. "We assumed that because their vehicles looked simple, they were inferior," he wrote. "We confused appearance with capability, and we paid terribly for that error. The Americans understood something we did not, that war is not won by the best technology, but by the best application of adequate technology. Their Jeep was not the most impressive vehicle, but it was exactly what they needed, and they built enough of them to equip entire armies. We built magnificent machines that broke down and could not be repaired. They built simple machines that kept running. In the end, the simple machines carried them to victory, while our magnificent machines sat broken beside roads." This is perhaps the hardest lesson for professional soldiers to learn, that competence matters more than excellence and that reliability defeats sophistication. His words reflected the painful education that defeat had provided, forcing German military professionals to confront assumptions that had seemed self-evident before reality proved them wrong. The broader strategic implications of logistic superiority extended beyond tactical mobility to encompass operational tempo and strategic initiative. American forces during 1944 and 1945 could plan operations knowing that logistics would support whatever schemes commanders developed. This confidence enabled aggressive operational planning that kept German forces constantly reacting rather than implementing their own plans. German forces during the same period had to plan operations around logistics constraints, asking first whether supply systems could support proposed actions rather than asking what actions would achieve strategic objectives. This fundamental difference in planning approaches meant that Americans held initiative throughout the war's final year, choosing when and where to attack while Germans responded to American moves. Initiative proved decisive because it forced Germans to fight on American terms at times and places that favored American strengths while exposing German weaknesses. The individual stories of courage and dedication behind logistics operations deserved recognition equal to combat actions, though they received less public attention. Corporal Jennifer Martinez, who had driven Sarah Chen's Jeep during the reconnaissance mission in France, continued driving supply missions throughout the European campaign. She accumulated more than 50,000 miles behind the wheel, driving through artillery fire, navigating bombed roads, and completing deliveries that kept frontline units supplied. Martinez never received medals for her service because driving trucks was not considered combat duty deserving recognition. Yet, her contribution to victory was as essential as any infantry soldiers, ensuring that troops who did fight had the ammunition, fuel, and supplies they needed. Her story was repeated by thousands of drivers who performed similar missions with similar dedication, forming the unglamorous foundation upon which military success was built. The mechanics who maintained Jeeps under field conditions demonstrated equal dedication, often working through nights to repair vehicles damaged during the day so they would be ready for the next day's missions. These soldiers received even less recognition than drivers, working in obscurity behind front lines where their contributions were invisible to everyone except the drivers whose vehicles they kept running. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a mechanic with the 1st Infantry Division, personally maintained more than 30 jeeps throughout the European campaign, ensuring that her unit never suffered vehicle shortages that limited operations. Santos developed encyclopedic knowledge of Jeep mechanical systems, diagnosing problems by sound and fixing issues that stumped less experienced mechanics. Her expertise saved countless hours that would have been lost to complicated repairs, keeping vehicles in service that less skilled mechanics might have declared unrepairable. When the war ended, Santos returned to civilian life and opened an automotive repair shop, applying skills learned in military service to civilian vehicles and building a successful business. Her transition from military to civilian life paralleled millions of other veterans whose war service had taught valuable skills applicable to post-war economy. The final accounting of Jeep operations reveals a vehicle that achieved both tactical success and strategic impact. Individual vehicles traveled hundreds of thousands of miles, and specific missions demonstrated capabilities that exceeded design specifications when vehicles were pushed to their limits. However, the cumulative impact on military operations was transformative. Logistics worked effectively throughout the European campaign. Allied forces maintained mobility and operational tempo that enemies could not match. Ground forces advanced with air support and artillery support fully coordinated because logistics kept all elements supplied and connected. The resources devoted to Jeep development and production, including manufacturing capacity, raw materials, and skilled labor, proved to be among the most cost-effective investments the American military made during the entire war. Each Jeep produced provided capabilities across multiple roles, multiplying the return on investment beyond what any single-purpose vehicle could have delivered. The story of German generals mocking Jeeps until those Jeeps carried armies across Europe is ultimately a story about humility, open-mindedness, and recognizing that effective solutions often come in unexpected packages. Germany developed sophisticated military vehicles that should have provided significant advantages. Yet this achievement could not overcome fundamental disadvantages in logistics philosophy, maintenance capability, fuel availability, and industrial production capacity. American soldiers driving less sophisticated vehicles but supported by superior logistics systems, comprehensive training, reliable supply chains, and sound operational doctrine defeated the technological marvels through persistence, adaptability, and professional competence. In the final analysis, the Jeep stands as one of military history's most successful equipment programs, a vehicle that exceeded expectations in every measurable category and enabled operations that changed the war's outcome. Its combat record, impressive in specific missions, was ultimately decisive in aggregate impact.
The American soldiers who drove, maintained, and employed Jeeps earned their place in military history not through technological superiority, but through tactical excellence, dedication, and a refusal to be limited by modest equipment. Their success validated the principle that human factors, including training, leadership, determination, and practical thinking, can overcome resource constraints when properly applied. The transformation from German contempt to Allied dependence on Jeeps occurred within less than 5 years from 1940, when Hartmann mocked American vehicles, to 1945, when those vehicles were carrying occupation forces into Berlin. This rapid shift resulted not from any single factor, but from cumulative effect of systematic application of sound logistics principles, combined with industrial production that enemies could not match and maintenance systems that kept vehicles operational despite brutal usage. Every Jeep that completed its mission was one more delivery that sustained combat operations. Every driver who navigated dangerous routes demonstrated courage that enabled strategic success. Every mechanic who repaired damaged vehicles contributed to maintaining the mobility that won campaigns. The final months of the war witnessed American logistics functioning at peak efficiency, despite operating across a shattered European landscape. Fuel supplies reached frontline units without interruption, despite distances exceeding 500 miles from ports to combat zones. Ammunition stocks remained adequate despite consumption rates that would have bankrupted pre-war planning estimates. Food supplies kept soldiers fed despite supporting millions of personnel spread across multiple countries. Medical supplies enabled treatment that saved thousands of lives that would have been lost in previous wars. All this logistical success depended fundamentally on vehicles that could reliably transport supplies from depots to users, and jeeps formed the backbone of that transportation system. The story concluded not with dramatic final battles, but with gradual transition from war to occupation, as Germany surrendered in May 1945. Jeeps that had carried armies across Europe now carried occupation forces into German cities, transported displaced persons to assembly areas, and hauled supplies for refugee relief operations. The vehicles that had enabled victory now enabled reconstruction, demonstrating once again their versatility and reliability. Soldiers who had driven jeeps in combat continued driving them in peace, applying the same skills to different missions. The seamless transition from wartime to peacetime employment proved that good design transcends specific applications, serving multiple purposes across changing circumstances.